Rainbow Nation. Now there's a phrase that is overused and may be misleading. It inspires passionate conversations, and the possibilities of a true rainbow nation has been the source of hope for our country. It infers the love and devotion that we as people have for each other, despite each other. But are we really a rainbow nation? For a phrase that's designed to heal, it has sometimes been used to put a plaster over a wound that needs more care. Being South African isn't as simple as talking about this rainbow nation ideal. You see, there's more to loving our nation than adoring Table Mountain and our Big Five. When we say we love our country, what exactly is it that we love? It has to be more than beautiful weather and World Heritage sites. What makes South Africa, well, South Africa? It's the people. To love South Africa is to love South Africans. Do me a favor. Close your eyes for a second. I want to try something out. Picture the average South African citizen. Think about it. How old are they? What's their hair like? What's the color of their skin? Go on? Okay. So chances are the person you're picturing right now looks a little different than the real average South African. There are 55.6 million South African citizens. Over 51% are female. So first off, the average South African is a woman. Cool, hey. Is that what you pictured? 44 million are black African. 2.9 million are senior citizens. 1.4 million are Asian. 600,000 South Africans are disabled. That's just about 20% of the entire Durban population. Around 16 million South Africans have access to piped water. 13 million are on Facebook. 740,000 are Muslim. And 10,000 have moved to South Africa due to religious persecution, amongst other crimes against humanity. These labels can help define us, keeping us dialed into our cultures and the knowledge of who we are, South Africans. The promise of a rainbow nation is the freedom to identify and celebrate the things that make us, us. When we look past the label and see the person, we find the real South African. What could take the ideal of a rainbow nation and turn it into a reality? From the Khoisan to the state flag, from the pain of colonization to the privilege of our constitution. This nation of diverse cultures and creeds needs this one thing: love. It has to be about love. Love that sees and listens, love that recognizes and respects. Love beyond age, disability, sexual orientation, race, and religion. Love beyond language, tribe, suburb, and settlement. Because the second any of us judge people based on those labels, we're not really standing for love, are we? So let's try this one more time. Picture the average Steve, or Sia, Suresh, or Susan. The real people who make South Africa. As you see these people, may you feel the urge to love rather than to judge them. May you question your assumptions about them. And may you see all South Africans for who they really are, created in the image of God. Remember that to love God is to love all South Africans. At the end of the day, there are these three things: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love.
Isn't that cool? I know our video team put a lot of work into getting that video ready for this week. And we're excited for this series. We're in the last of the 3-week series called RSA, where over the past 3 weeks, we've been speaking about these grand ideas that we find in 1 Corinthians 13. Faith, hope, and love. And the idea behind the series has been that no matter what kind of is going on in your life, or no matter what's going on in this country of ours or in this world, no matter what troubles and uncertainties we may face, we hold these three things to be certain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. And that's what we're going to speak about today. The greatest of these, love. Now, I'm going to take a kind of totally different angle on this one today. And I want to look at a Bible story. It's a very well-known story. It's one you've probably heard many times before. It's the one where David kills Goliath. Spoiler alert, okay? If you didn't know. And you may think, well, what does this story have to do with love? And what has it got to do with South Africa? Well, I ask you to kind of bear with me, because I think in the end, hopefully it will all make sense. Because I believe this common story, this common text, has an often overlooked application that I believe is extremely pertinent for your own life and for our country, for the future of RSA. And as I said last week, I'm really excited about this series, about this message, because I kind of believe that I feel like God has impressed a message on my heart for our church, for our community, and even, dare I say, for our country. So my hope is that you'll lean in, that you'll open your mind and your heart and your ears and your soul to hear what God wants to say to us this evening. Are you ready? Awesome. 1 Samuel 17. Picking up in verse 48. As Goliath moved closer to attack David, David quickly ran out to meet him. First observation, God's people don't run from trouble, we run towards it. Reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath. David used it to kill him and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they turned and ran. I mean, we love this story. It's one of the most famous Bible stories, probably one of the most preached Bible stories in all of history. We teach it to our kids in Sunday school, which is kind of bizarre if you think about it. I mean, it's like a gruesome, violent story, but anyway. But I'd like to argue that this story, this David and Goliath, it nearly didn't happen. It nearly didn't happen. And so I want you to pause and stop for a moment and think about something in your life, something good that happened in your life that nearly didn't happen. Maybe it was meeting your partner. You know, if I hadn't gone out to that place, if I hadn't, gone to that party or whatever, and my sister met her husband, she got invited to go paddling on the river in a canoe, and she'd never been, and she didn't really want to go, but she went anyway, and she spent most of the time falling out the boat. And Daryl, who's now my brother-in-law, he came paddling past, and he saw, my sister coming out the water. She must have done like I think it was more like, anyway, but the rest is history. So think of something in your life that you nearly missed, maybe a business opportunity. And when you look back now, you kind of think, well, I'm so glad I didn't let fear or apathy or the opinions of others perhaps stop me, because it never would have happened. I think it's a lot easier to identify these kinds of things, looking back. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, how when we explain something after the event has transpired, often it's much different than how we actually experienced it. It's easy to look back on things and say, I can see how God was orchestrating, I can see how God was working these things. But when we're in the midst of it, we're going, God, what are you doing? And the story of David's kind of like that. And it very nearly didn't happen. You see, David wasn't just a shepherd boy who took down the giant in the valley of Elah. He wasn't just a giant killer. He was actually a king in training. And again, I must say, I was inspired by a message by Steve Furtick, and that this has kind of given so much inspiration to what I want to say, because I think it's so pertinent for our country. But he kind of gives some context, and if you don't know the context, for those of you who don't know, let me kind of share a bit of the context around 1 Samuel 16. You see, Samuel was a prophet, and he was coming to town to anoint the next king after Saul. God wasn't happy with Saul, because even though Saul had the stature of a king, he didn't have the heart of a shepherd. And God was looking for a man after his own heart, someone who had the heart of a shepherd, who could love and care for his people, for the people of Israel. And so he sends Samuel to anoint the next king. And even this part of the story, I thought, wow, isn't that amazing? Isn't it amazing what happens when God puts people of faith, people who love and care for others with a shepherd's heart, into positions of influence? Man, how it changes things. It changes schools. It changes family. It changes homes. It can change it changes government. My prayer is that God would raise up people who have a heart for His people, for our people, in positions, seats of power. So anyway, back to the story. God is looking for this next king. And when Samuel comes to town, he comes with a horn of oil that is symbolically poured over the next king to anoint the next king. And he goes to Jesse's house because that's where God tells him to go. But I love this. He doesn't tell Samuel who, he just says go to Jesse's house. But he doesn't kind of give him any more direction. Doesn't tell him which of the 8 sons was going to be king. And I thought that's interesting because sometimes I think God will give you enough of the details to get you in the right area, but He won't always give you the specifics. You ever found that out? And I think that's He often does that because it kind of keeps us reliant on God. If He just laid out the whole plan, then we wouldn't really need God, would we? And so He gives us often, I find, just enough light to take the next step, but not enough light that we don't need Him to guide us along the path. Anyway, Saul goes to Jesse's house and he looks at the 8 sons of Jesse. Eliab was the oldest. He was the tall one and quite an impressive guy. Another one of the sons' names was Shammah. If you're looking for baby names, this is just free. It's gold here. And all these boys are kind of impressive. But as Saul goes down the line, God says, not him, not him, not him, not him. And so after Samuel has passed over all the 7 select sons, Samuel kind of says, well, is there another one? I think this is verse 11. He says, then Samuel asked, are these all the sons you have? And then listen to Jesse, the dad's response. He doesn't even, when he's referring to David, he doesn't even have the common courtesy to refer to him by his name. He says, well, they're still the youngest. He doesn't refer to him by his potential, only by his position. So he's still the youngest, but he's out in the fields watching the sheep and goats. Samuel says, send for him at once. We will not sit down and eat until he arrives. Oh, they're still the youngest. I think sometimes life will try to do this to you, to me. It will try to label us. We do this all the time to one another. We label one another based on not our potential, but on our position. We label each other based on, educational background. We label each other according to race, as the video said, according to whether, our gender, according to our accent. Life will try to label you in this way. But here's the thing. The one that they didn't even think to bring into the room was the one that God had chosen from the foundation of the world to lead His people. God selects what man rejects. Isn't that cool? Isn't that's good news? That's good news for you and for me. Well, I think it is. And God knew how to find David. He knew how to find David even in the field. He didn't need David to be in the lineup. And the takeaway for us today is that you don't have to position yourself in front of people to be used by God. You don't have to convince a committee that you're good enough for the grace of God. And there's something so freeing about that we don't have to worry whether or not people accept us. We don't have to worry whether or not they notice us or appreciate what we do, or even whether they call us by our correct name. Because if you have a heart that is willing, then God can use you. But here's the thing, and this is kind of where I'm getting to, the crux of the message. If David hadn't been in the field tending sheep, then he wouldn't have been prepared to lead people. And what he could have seen or should have seen or maybe probably did see as kind of insignificant work, tending sheep, or as kind of menial work, was exactly the thing that he needed to prepare him for his assignment. And it's a funny thing because you'd kind of expect that after this moment, after David is anointed by Samuel, you'd kind of expect that the next scene would be, David kind of getting ready, getting his priest, his kingly robes on and checking out the crown, and getting ready to, leave shepherding and go live in the palace. Isn't that what you would expect? But David, he goes right back to being a shepherd. And even though he was anointed king, it would be many, many years later before he would wear the crown. And I think this is important because sometimes I think we expect that when God announces a change in our lives, well, we expect it to be activated immediately. And we get confused when God says that it's your time, but He asks us to wait our turn. And again, Steve Furtick has kind of inspired me in this, but in some ways, this is the entire Christian life. When you give your life to Christ, in a moment you're saved. In a moment we're forgiven. In a moment we're cleansed. In a moment we're redeemed. All those things are true. But all the changes that those realities are meant to produce in our lives, they don't happen, or certainly not for me, I don't know about for you, but they don't happen immediately. They happen gradually. And yes, there are things in my life that God kind of has changed in a moment. I believe that. But there are many, many, many more things that God is working out of me that I'm still trying to work out. That's the journey of faith. That's the life of faith. David didn't go around practicing his kingly wave. He went back to the sheep to do what he was doing before. Until one day, his father gave him an assignment. And not a lot of people we kind of skip over this part of the story. Because everyone knows the stuff about Goliath and the slings, and we love that part of the story. And let me say, if you ever want to preach a story about Goliath, preach a message about Goliath. People love messages about Goliath. Because the reality is we all have giants in our lives. We're all facing something that's bigger than us. Whether it's our, addiction or depression or a marriage, that's breaking down that we just can't seem to fix. We're all facing giants, fears, anxieties. And so when a preacher gets up and says, hey, God's going to help you take down the giant, then we say, amen. We get excited. Just Brad in this context, but if you had an Angus Buchan thing, then it's amen. And guys get really amped. But I heard Steve Furtick say something around this. He was preaching on this same passage. He was preparing. As he was preparing, he felt like God said to him this. He said this. He said, most of the people you're talking to never even get to Goliath. You're trying to teach them how to kill an enemy that they're never even going to meet. And he said, well, what do you mean? And he went back to the text and he noticed something. And it's found in chapter 17. This is so profound. One day, Jesse said to David, take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread and carry them quickly to your brothers. And that may seem like an odd part of the story, an odd detail. But you've got to remember, David was the future king. He could have very easily said, hey, don't you know who I am? Weren't you there when Samuel anointed me? I'm the chosen one, bro. I'm the anointed one. I'm going to be the king. I'm not going to run your little errands taking bread to the brothers who didn't even want me to be there when Samuel came. But this is the test, see? To see if David will do the basic things. This is really the main point of my message today. If you get nothing else, I hope you get this. That sometimes we want God to do a big thing in our lives, in our country, but we won't even do the basics. Sometimes we want God to use us to do big things, to topple giants, but we won't even do the basics. And the question is, how in the world can God use us to do something big when we won't even do something small? And this little detail is so important for your life, for my life, and for this country. And it shows the heart of David, because this story could have stopped right here and there. And David could have said, you know what, I'm not going to do that. That's beneath me. And it could have ended right there. And he never would have seen Goliath. Never would have even seen him. And as I read that, it really kind of hit me because I think I do this and we do this all the time. All the little ways that we kind of disobey God, the small things He asks us to do. Call your sister and say you're sorry. Say you're sorry. Stop posting that stuff. Reach out to somebody who looks different to you and listen to them about their struggle, about their pain. It's little things. But the truth is, some of us want to kill Goliath, but we don't want to tend sheep. How in the world can God use us to kill giants if we can't even follow simple instructions? Here's something else worth considering about this story. You see, David, when he went to take lunch to his brothers, you got to understand this. He didn't know it was going to be 1 Samuel 17. He was just going on another day. doing another menial task. He didn't know that the day that he was taking bread and cheese to his brothers was going to be the same day that he'd be standing over the giant, cutting off his head, changing the fate of a nation forever. And here's what I know, and here's what I've kind of seen in my own life, and I think throughout history, is that sometimes God wraps destiny in what we perceive as just another day. But we've got to do the small things. I mean, I don't know if you know what's happening in Zimbabwe at the moment. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, there's this pastor who feels compelled by God to put a flag around his shoulders and post a video about his love for his country and faith in God. And he doesn't know that it's going to go viral. But this video just kind of spreads, and it creates a movement. Hundreds of thousands of people protesting and marching, and in such a way now that they actually have a good shot of toppling a corrupt system. Because one guy just said, hey, I'm just going to do this thing that God has called me to do. He didn't know. David didn't know that it was the same day that he would stand over Goliath. He would have missed it if he had not obeyed simple instructions. What does this mean for you and me? Well, it means that if I'm asking God to do big things in my life, if we're asking God to do big things in our country, well, then we better obey Him in the small ways. Now, you might think I've forgotten that we're in an RSA series. And you might still be wondering, well, what does this have to do with South Africa and love? I mean, isn't that the topic? And I kind of wrestled with this because I really felt this message was the message I wanted to speak to you today. But then as I began preparing and as I read the sermons of the other preachers from the other campuses, I started thinking, well, maybe I've missed it. Maybe this is an inappropriate message. But again, I really felt this thing. No, this is the right story. This is the message. I'm just not looking at it at the right level. You see, and this is when it kind of dawned on me. When we preach about Goliath, so often we make it a personal issue. You know, we talk about my giants, my depression, my anxiety, my addiction, the things that are towering over me. But this is important. Goliath wasn't a personal issue for David. He was a national issue for the nation of Israel. The giant was keeping the whole nation deadlocked in a stranglehold of fear. And David shows up. He does a simple thing, brings food to his brothers. But it was that simple thing that led to a much bigger thing. And the point is this: don't think that because you can't affect something at the highest level of power that God can't use you in a great way. Don't think that. David wasn't even in the army and he won the war. I mean, he didn't even have a uniform. He didn't even have a weapon that was fit for combat. And he's the one that brought down the giant. And I believe when we are each willing, each and every, you and I, when we're willing to do the small things, I believe that God will position us for big things in our lives and in our country. I really believe that. And let me just say this, man, we have some national giants, don't we? We have a lot of them, not just one, but many. Racism, injustice, prejudice, corruption, poverty, unemployment. These are the giants of our land. National problems. And they're keeping our nation in a deadlock, just like the Philistines were doing to the nation of Israel. And it's interesting, as I thought more about this, I thought, you get all those hashtags on Facebook, racism must fall. Prejudice must fall. I saw a really good one just recently, school holidays must fall. Preach it. But these are the giants in our land, not the school holidays, but the other stuff. And let me tell you, they are standing over us and they are beating their chest and they are taunting the armies of the living God. But if we want our giants to fall, if we want God to do big things, then we have to be willing to do the small things that may seem inconsequential, that may even feel beneath us. But if we do, God is going to position us in a place to not only face, but to take out the giants of our land. Let me give you some examples as we kind of wrap things up. This is all the small, I want to talk about the small ways, the small things that each and every single one of us can do on a day-to-day basis to position us to take out the giants. And this has all got to do with love, loving people. I mean, as Bones so clearly said on the video, if we say we love South Africa, surely it's more than our great beaches and the Drakensberg. If we say South Africa, what we're really saying is we love South Africans, all people, that we're called to love all people. I mean, the Bible goes even one step further. God says, how can you say you love me if you don't love? Anyone who says they love me but don't love my people is a liar. Because how can you say you love something which you cannot see when you can't even love that which you can see? We're called to love one another. And there are ways we can do this, simple ways, small ways. Facebook. I mean, Facebook is such a gift to us. It's such an incredible tool in our hands as followers of Christ, as the church. I mean, it helps us to stay connected to one another. It helps us to connect to people. It helps us to put a message out there that gives hope and life to people that maybe normally wouldn't step into the walls of a church. It's a platform that we can use for God's glory, but it can also, of course, be a curse. And you can see how sometimes Facebook becomes so polarizing, so divisive. You see this in the comments section. You know, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Well, and there's just this kind of, hate and people are just defending and it just doesn't help. But we can do something. We can decide how we speak into those things. We can decide to speak with love and with grace, to express our views in a way that is humble, that gives the benefit of the doubt, that believes the best of other people, or just decide not to engage in that kind of stuff. But these are things we can do. Yes? Here's another something we can do. It's a small thing, maybe not such a small thing, but an important thing. Pay your domestic worker a living wage. Ooh, don't go there, Tom. Too late. Livingwage.co.za. You can go there. You can type it in. Sit down with your domestic worker. Speak to her. How many dependents does she have? What kind of home does she live in? Does she have plumbed water? Because only 16 million out of 55 have it. What does she? What school fees? What kind of things is she dealing with? What are her dreams? Do it, man. Don't. People say, oh, I can't afford it. I said that. I understand that excuse. I get that. But man, what we're really saying when we're saying that is that we can't afford is we're saying, I can't afford to maintain my standard of living and do that. That's actually what we're saying. And what we're really saying then is, well, I will continue to be part of a system that oppresses the poor and keeps them in a constant cycle of poverty that affects not only them, but the next generation as well, so that I can maintain my levels of comfort. I don't want to offend people, and if I did, this is important. If we don't talk about it now, where are we going to talk about it? Pay your mate a living wage. Figure out what that is. And if you had to cut back, then do whatever you have to do so that you can help someone get out of the cycle of poverty and change a heritage for a family that leaves a legacy that changes not just their lives, but the lives of their children and children's children. I just finished reading Cry the Beloved Country, and I'm ashamed to say I only read it at the age of 34, but I think it should be compulsory reading for every South African. But he says this, it's a profound thing. He says, it is permissible to develop any resources if the labor is forthcoming. But it is not permissible to develop any resources if they can be developed only at the cost of the labor. It is not permissible to mine any gold or manufacture any product or cultivate any land if such mining and manufacture and cultivation depend for their success on a policy of keeping labor poor. It is not permissible to add to one's possessions if these things can only be done at the cost of other men and women. Such development has only one true name, and that is exploitation. Small things, but big things. We can do these things. To love everyone that comes across our path. Again, this is a small thing. We don't have to love. We're not asking you to be Mother Teresa. We're just saying, love the people that God has brought into your life. Just do whatever you can do. Love people regardless of their race, regardless of their station, like we saw in that video. And again, we nod our heads and we say, yes, amen to that. But it's something that runs so deep inside of us, all of us, every single one of us. I love what Rick Warren says. He says, racism is not a problem of skin, it's a problem of sin. It's inside of us. I mean, I've told this story before, but I run with the Regents guys in the morning. We're running in the morning, and it's kind of dark, and sometimes you run past other people. And I remember the one morning we're running along, and there's a woman walking her dog. And as we run past, it's a white woman, we go, oh, good morning, everyone, good morning, good morning. And then we run past someone else, good morning, good morning. And then I remember we ran past a guy, a black guy who's digging in a bin at 5:30 in the morning, and he's looking for something to eat. He wasn't asking anything of anyone, but as we ran past, not one person said good morning. I mean, what is that? What is that inside of us? What does that do to someone? Systemic racism is a real problem, not just in South Africa, but in our world. It's a giant, man. It's a big giant. And that giant must fall. White privilege, black pain, these things are real, guys. And if you push back, ask yourself why. Be willing to confront your own stuff. Listen to people who've experienced pain that you have never. Don't dismiss it or try to justify it or rationalize it or tell people to get over it and move on. That's not helpful. But if we're willing to do the small things, I believe God will position us to do big things. And when we say we love South Africa, we say we love our people. And the message, it's about love. This is about love. And love is, as I've kind of discovering, is a big thing and a small thing. It's shown in small ways, but it makes big waves. I wrote that down. I thought that was brilliant. Just me, but let me say it again because maybe I think you missed it. It's shown in small ways, but it makes big waves. Wow, that's what I was looking for. Okay. Mother Teresa says, I don't do big things, I do small things with big love. Let us love. Let us be a people who loves without prejudice, without reserve, without judgment. Love is really the thing that will save this country. That's not a rhetoric. That's not some sweet, naive notion. It will save your marriage. It will save your family. Love is the only hope we got. Again, Cry the Beloved Country. He's speaking on power, and then he says this about love. He says, but there is only one thing that has power completely, and that is love. Because when a man loves, he seeks no power, and therefore he has power. I see only one hope for our country, and that is when white men and black men, desiring neither power nor money, but desiring only the good of their country, come together to work for it. Love is a powerful force. And this is just my opinion, but I think the only way that we can love like that, the only way we can truly love people who've wronged us, love people who've hurt us, love people who are different from us, the only way I think we can do that is when we understand first and foremost that we are loved. Yes. That in ourselves we are bankrupt, but for the love of God. That's why the cross is here. That's why it's front and center throughout the series. It is the symbol of God's love for us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And when we look at the cross, we're able to love others as God has loved us. And while God sent David to fight for the Israelites, many years later, God would send his people another young hero to fight for them and to save them. And this hero, Jesus, wouldn't just fight against a giant, but would fight the greatest battle the world has ever known. And we know who wins that battle. And he did it without picking up a sword or even slinging a single stone. He did it with love, a revolution of love that changed the course of human history, that changed the course of my life and many of your lives as well. And so let us love in small ways that make big waves. I'm going to ask you to stand. I'm going to call the band up. We're going to sing one last song as we close. And I could go on and on about small ways that we obey God, that position us so that God can use us to do big things. But do you see what I'm trying to do? What I'm trying to say is that God wants to use you right now, right where you are. And you say, well, I don't have much. And David said, well, I don't have much. I got a sling and a stone. But in the name of the Lord, Goliath will fall. In the name of the Lord, Goliath must fall. If David had not been willing to do the simple thing, he would never have seen the supernatural thing. And I believe that this country needs a supernatural breakthrough, a supernatural intervention. I really do. But we got to be willing to take lunch to our brothers. We got to be willing to obey simple instructions. And I want to close with this. This really hit me. But as we look at the story one last time, the last verse before he fights Goliath, it says, when David's oldest brother Eliab heard David talking to the men, he was angry. What are you doing around here anyway, David, he demanded. What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle. This spoke to me, especially in the context of South Africa. If David had listened to Eliab, he would never have seen Goliath. If David had stayed and fought with his brother, he never would have killed the enemy. And I believe the evil one tries to do this. He tries to keep us from being victorious as a church and as a nation, as a body of Christ. He wants to keep us so divided and so fighting one another that we never actually face the real enemies. I see this in our churches. Guys, we're not fighting each other. You are my brother, you are my sister. We are in this together. And if we're going to fight the darkness, then we've got to stand together. David had his eyes on something bigger. He didn't engage with that fight. He turned and he faced the real enemy, which was Goliath. The giant keeping his people in a deadlock. And it nearly didn't happen. It nearly didn't happen. I want to end with this. 2 Chronicles. I read this last week. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. I will heal their land. I will bring down their giants. I will overcome. I will prevail. Racism must fall. Corruption must fall. Poverty must fall. Injustice must fall. Goliath must fall. In the name of the Lord. In the name of the Lord. Let's sing together.
And every giant will fall. The mountains will move. Every chain of the past is broken into. All the fear, all the lies. We're singing the truth.